Section 11 of Confessions, volumes 3 and 4. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Confessions, volumes 3 and 4, by Jean Jacques Rousseau, anonymously translated. Section 11. Arrived at Toune, and myself well dried, we breakfasted together, after which it was necessary to settle the important business of preparing dinner. The young ladies cooked, kissing from time to time the farmer's children, while the poor scullion looked on grumbling. Provisions had been sent for from town, and there was everything necessary for a good dinner, but unhappily they had forgotten wine. This forgetfulness was by no means astonishing to girls who seldom drank any, but I was sorry for the omission, as I had reckoned on its help, thinking it might add to my confidence. They were sorry likewise, and perhaps from the same motive, though I have no reason to say this, for their lively and charming gaiety was innocence itself. Besides, there were two of them. What could they expect from me? They went everywhere about the neighborhood to seek for wine, but none could be procured, so pure and sober are the peasants in those parts. As they were expressing their concern, I begged them not to give themselves any uneasiness on my account, for while with them, I had no occasion for wine to intoxicate me. This was the only gallantry I ventured at during the whole of the day, and I believe the sly rogues saw well enough that I said nothing but the truth. We dined in the kitchen. The two friends were seated on the benches, one on each side the long table, and their guest at the end, between them, on a three-legged stool. What a dinner! How charming the remembrance! While we can enjoy at so small an expense such pure, such true delights, why should we be solicitous for others? Never did those petites soupes, so celebrated in Paris, equal this. I do not only say for real pleasure and gaiety, but even for sensuality. After dinner we were economical. Instead of drinking the coffee we had reserved at breakfast, we kept it for an afternoon collation with cream, and some cake they had brought with them. To keep our appetites in play, we went into the orchard, meaning to finish our dessert with cherries. I got into a tree, throwing them down bunches, from which they returned the stones through the branches. One time, Mademoiselle Galley, holding out her apron, and drawing back her head, stood so fair, and I took such good aim, that I dropped a bunch into her bosom. On her laughing, I said to myself, why are not my lips cherries? How gladly would I throw them there likewise. Thus the day passed with the greatest freedom, yet with the utmost decency. Not a single equivocal word, not one attempt at double-meaning pleasantry. Yet this delicacy was not affected, we only performed the parts our hearts dictated. In short, my modesty, some will say my folly, was such that the greatest familiarity that escaped me was once kissing the hand of Mademoiselle Galley. It is true, the attending circumstances helped to stamp a value on this trifling favor. We were alone. I was embarrassed. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and my lips, instead of uttering words, were pressed on her hand, which she drew gently back after the salute, without any appearance of displeasure. I know not what I should have said to her, but her friend entered, and at that moment I thought her ugly. At length they bethought themselves that they must return to town before night. Even now we had but just time to reach it by daylight, and we hastened our departure in the same order we came. Had I pleased myself, I should certainly have reversed this order, for the glance of Mademoiselle Galley had reached my heart, but I dared not mention it, and the proposal could not reasonably come from her. On the way, we expressed our sorrow that the day was over, but far from complaining of the shortness of its duration, we were conscious of having prolonged it by every possible amusement. I quitted them in nearly the same spot where I had taken them up. With what regret did we part! With what pleasure did we form projects to renew our meeting! Delightful hours which we passed innocently together, yet were worth ages of familiarity. The sweet remembrance of those days cost those amiable girls nothing. The tender union which reigned among us equaled more lively pleasures with which it could not have existed. We loved each other without shame or mystery, and wished to continue our reciprocal affection. There is a species of enjoyment connected with innocence of manners, which is superior to any other, because it has no interval. For myself, the remembrance of such a day touches me nearer, delights me more, and returns with greater rapture to my heart than any other pleasure I ever tasted. I hardly knew what I wished with those charming girls. I do not say that had the arrangement been in my power, I should have divided my heart between them. I certainly felt some degree of preference, though I should have been happy to have had Mademoiselle de G for a mistress. I think by choice I should have liked her better as a confidante. Be that as it may, I felt on leaving them as though I could not live without either. Who would have thought that I should never see them more, and that here our ephemeral amours must end? Those who read this will not fail to laugh at my gallantries, and remark that after very promising preliminaries, my most forward adventures concluded by a kiss of the hand. Yet be not mistaken, reader, in your estimate of my enjoyments. I have, perhaps, tasted more real pleasure in my amours, which concluded by a kiss of the hand, than you will ever have in yours, which at least begin there. Venture, who had gone to bed late the night before, came in soon after me. I did not now see him with my usual satisfaction, and took care not to inform him how I had passed the day. The ladies had spoken of him slightingly, and appeared discontented at finding me in such bad hands. This hurt him in my esteem. Besides, whatever diverted my ideas from them was at this time disagreeable. However, he soon brought me back to him and myself by speaking of the situation of my affairs, which was too critical to last, for though I spent very little, my slender finances were almost exhausted. I was without resource, no news of Madame de Warrens, not knowing what would become of me, and feeling a cruel pang at heart to see the friend of Mademoiselle Galley reduced to beggary. I now learned from Venture that he had spoken of me to the Judge Major, and would take me next day to dine with him, that he was a man who, by means of his friends, might render me essential service. In other respects he was a desirable acquaintance, being a man of wit and letters, of agreeable conversation, one who possessed talents and loved them in others. After this discourse, mingling the most serious concerns with the most trifling frivolity, he showed me a pretty couplet which came from Paris, on an air in one of Mouret's operas, which was then playing. Monsieur Simon, the Judge Major, was so pleased with this couplet that he determined to make another in answer to it, on the same air. He had desired Venture to write one, and he wished me to make a third, that, as he expressed it, they might see couplets start up next day like incidents in a comic romance. In the night, not being able to sleep, I composed a couplet, as my first essay in poetry. It was passable, better, or at least composed with more taste than it would have been the preceding night, the subject being tenderness, to which my heart was now entirely disposed. In the morning I showed my performance to Venture, who, being pleased with the couplet, put it in his pocket, without informing me whether he had made his. We dined with Monsieur Simon, who treated us very politely. The conversation was agreeable. Indeed, it could not be otherwise between two men of natural good sense, improved by reading. For me, I acted my proper part, which was to listen without attempting to join in the conversation. Neither of them mentioned the couplet, nor do I know that it ever passed for mine. Monsieur Simon appeared satisfied with my behavior; indeed, it was almost all he saw of me at this interview. We had often met at Madame de Warrens, but he had never paid much attention to me. It is from this dinner, therefore, that I date our acquaintance, which, though of no use in regard to the object I then had in view, was afterwards productive of advantages which make me recollect it with pleasure. I should be wrong not to give some account of this person, since from his office of magistrate, and the reputation of wit on which he piqued himself, no idea could be formed of it. The Judge Major, Simon, certainly was not 2 feet high. His legs, spare, straight, and tolerably long, would have added something to his stature had they been vertical, but they stood in the direction of an open pair of compasses. His body was not only short, but thin, being in every respect of most inconceivable smallness. When naked, he must have appeared like a grasshopper. His head was of the common size, to which appertained a well formed face, a noble look, and tolerably fine eyes. In short, it appeared a borrowed head stuck on a miserable stump. He might very well have dispensed with dress, for his large wig alone covered him from head to foot. He had two voices, perfectly different, which intermingled perpetually in his conversation, forming at first a diverting, but afterwards a very disagreeable contrast. One grave and sonorous was, if I may hazard the expression, the voice of his head; the other, clear, sharp, and piercing, the voice of his body. When he paid particular attention, and spoke leisurely, so as to preserve his breath, he could continue his deep tone; but if he was the least animated, or attempted a lively accent, his voice sounded like the whistling of a key, and it was with the utmost difficulty that he could return to the bass. With the figure I have just described, and which is by no means overcharged, M. Simon was gallant, ever entertaining the ladies with soft tales, and carrying the decoration of his person even to foppery. Willing to make use of every advantage, he, during the morning, gave audience in bed; for when a handsome head was discovered on the pillow, no one could have imagined what belonged to it. This circumstance gave birth to scenes which I am certain are yet remembered by all Annecy. End of Section 11. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.